Egypt sleeps beneath the desert moon, for now moves quietly through the land.
But somewhere in the darkness, chains scrape against stone, bricks fall into place, whips crack in the distance. A nation groans under the weight of slavery, the generations they have suffered. And heaven has been silent, but silence does not mean God is absent. One day, the cry rose high enough. Exodus 2:23.
When the broken voices cry from the chains they could not hide, heaven heard the rising pain. God remembered every chain, through the darkness, through the night. Every whisper reached the height when the oppressed began to pray. Deliverance was on its way.
The sun rises over the fields of Egypt. Thousands of slaves march toward the work sites. Men carry stones heavier than their strength. Women labor beneath the heat. Children grow up learning the rhythm of oppression. Mortar, mortar. The empire grows stronger. The people grow weaker. Years turn into decades. Decades become centuries. The memory of freedom begins fading. Some wonder if God has forgotten them. Some whisper old stories of Abraham, of promises spoken generations ago. But promises feel distant beneath the crack of a whip, until one day something changes. The suffering becomes too heavy to contain. Voices begin rising, not in rebellion, not in violence, in prayer. The cries of the oppressed begin climbing toward heaven, and heaven listens.
When the broken voices cry from the chains they could not hide, heaven heard the rising pain. God remembered every chain, through the darkness, through the night. Every whisper reached the height when the oppressed began to pray. Deliverance was on its way.
Exodus tells us something powerful. God heard their groaning. God remembered his covenant. God saw their suffering. God knew. 4 words that change everything. God heard.
God remembered.
God saw.
God knew.
The cries of the oppressed are never lost in the air. They rise, they travel, they reach the throne of heaven. And when God begins to move, empires begin to tremble. Pharaoh did not know it yet, but the deliverer had already been born. A child floating in a basket along the Nile. A child raised in the palace of the very empire that enslaved his people. A man named Moses. The cries and the slaves had already begun the collapse of Egypt's power. Because when God hears suffering, history begins to shift.
And the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and they cried.
Exodus 2:23.
And the cry came up unto God.
Heaven heard. From bricks in the sand to chains in the dust, the people cried out though their backs were crushed. Through centuries heavy with sorrow and flame, the groans of the broken still carried his name. Empires rise, tall and kings make a man, but none can silence the cry of the land. For every throne that forgets what is right will shake when God answers the prayer of the night. It's still in the world where oppression remains. The cry of the captive still rises through chains. For heaven's delivers through sorrow and scar, and justice still waits for the faithful law.
When the broken voices cry from the chains they could not hide, come and heard the rising pain. God remembered every chain, through the darkness, through the night. Every whisper reached the height when the oppressed began to pray. Deliverance was on its way.
But their cries were already shaking heaven.